Today we're looking at Psalms 49, again in the same vein as the Psalms that we've looked at before, one that's about expressiveness. There isn't the sense of imagery on some of these, and that's fine. I mean, we're looking at as the deer and the iniquity and the darkness and being, lost in the mire. There are different type of figuratisms and descriptors that are used by different psalms, and some of them are a little more straightforward, and there's nothing wrong with a good straightforward psalm. Hear this, all ye people, give ear, all ye inhabitants of the earth, both low and high, rich and poor. My mouth shall speak wisdom, and the meditation of my heart shall be understanding. Here he's going this telling about the fantasy, the fallacy of riches, and how they that trust in riches and boast, but none of them by any means can redeem his brother or give God a ransom. The idea, you cannot ransom yourself. You cannot buy yourself back with all of those riches, even if you have riches, even if you have wealth. And yes, it is kind of early in the morning here. I noticed that it's a little dark behind me, but I got an early start this morning. Sorry, little segue there. I was just noticing that it's morning time. But okay, we're going back to, you can't redeem your soul. Wise men die, likewise the fool and the brutish man. They're going to die. They're going to pass on. And nevertheless, the man being in honor abideth not. He is like the beast that perished. So we have to remember that our lives are finite, that we are only here for a certain amount of time. And sometimes the foolishness of pursuing riches, the foolishness of chasing after lifestyles, we forget that our lives are like grass. The story in the New Testament that Jesus told about the man who built several barns, and he thought, okay, now I've got riches and I've got sustenance for many years, and God said to him, thou fool, tonight your soul will be required of you. Like sheep where you're laid in the grave, death shall come to feed on them, and the upright shall have dominion over them in the morning. But God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. So here we got, our hope is in the fact that no matter what, our God will receive us. Be not afraid when one is made rich, when the glory of his house is increased. Don't be afraid of the power of another man who has more stuff. It's all going to balance out. It's all going to balance out to the same. We tend to forget that. We tend to think that, well, the powerful have an advantage. We hear the word privilege a lot in our world today. Well, here there is no privilege. You might have riches, you might be poor, but there's no privilege to either one. God is the privilege. For when he died, talking about the rich man, he shall take away nothing. Though while he lived, he blessed his soul, and men shall praise thee. He shall go to the generation of his father, he shall not see light. Man that is in honor and understandeth not is like the beasts that perish. So if you live in honor but you understand not, you don't understand who you are or what's going on. So this is a very, this psalm is very basic. It's very base, but it's very similar to what we'll see later on that Solomon will do with Ecclesiastes. The idea of giving us perspective. And many of these that are not as figurative, not as expressive, not as descriptive, will give us perspective. And sometimes that's what we need, is some good, strong perspective. Going back to, we finished 7 and 8 yesterday, the anointing of the priest, and how that they were taken, they were anointed by Moses, and they were put away for 7 days. So the idea that they're going to be consecrated, they're going to be hallowed, they're going to become holy, and they stay 7 days within the camp. They are taken care of by the offerings that are brought. They are fed, they have water, they have, I'm sure that they have to change clothes if they have to go out of the camp to take care of basic needs or whatever, go out of the temple. But basically you had to, or maybe they had some kind of latrine system set up, that's not mentioned, but the idea that they were to stay where they were and they would be taken care of. In 9, we see that on the 8th day, so here we're going to have a continuation. Again, we see this overriding thread of this story. And now we see on the 8th day that Aaron comes to him, and now you're going to take a young calf, a sin offering, and a ram, and you're going to take a bullock, and you're going to offer a sin offering to the Lord. So now that you've consecrated, we're going to do a sin offering, and we're going to get moving on to you now becoming the priest that you need to be. So Aaron has to have a sin offering. This is one of the reasons why Jesus is of the priest of Melchizedek. Melchizedek we don't see him having to need a sin offering to become a priest. Aaron had to have a sin offering to become a priest. Jesus would not need a sin offering to become a priest because he is sinless. That's why he is not of the Aaronic priesthood in that sense. And so we have that Moses commanded for the tabernacle, and this is the thing that the Lord commanded, and the glory of the Lord shall appear unto you. So they go to the altar, they offer the sin offering, they offer the burnt offering, and this is for the people also. So now they're starting to do sin offerings for the people. They're starting to get engaging with the people. The purpose of the priesthood was to meet the needs of the people, to be God's representatives to the people. We're going to see that they take care of sin issues, they take care of legal issues, they take care of small trespass sins, things that are like lying, or, like we're saying about petty theft, lying, that kind of thing. Things that aren't worthy of death, but they still are sociological sins. Later, we'll see that they are also involved with medical practices, how that they diagnose. They watch for disease. They watch for leprosy. They're giving medical training to understand how to deal with people. And it's very interesting how we see this growing, how it expands from worship to personableness, to being able to affect society and not just sit in some aesthetic world where we're worshiping, but we're not caring what's going on around us. But right now, taking care of sin is the big issue. Then later on, we'll see that with the laws, with the governance, with the economy, remember the shekel of the tabernacle. The tabernacle would control the shekel, which later on, without God, the tabernacle controls the shekel, but it's abused. There's usury. There's big problems when man is in religion without the God. There's always big problem. And here we have the establishment of God, the establishment of the sin offering for the people. Aaron went therefore from the altar and slew the calf, and the sons of Aaron brought the blood unto him. And he put the blood on the horns of the altar and poured the blood on the bottom. They took away the caul and the kidneys. They slew the burnt offering and presented it to God. And they washed the burnt offering, and they slew the bullock, and they did the wave offering again. They were told about the wave offering earlier, so they did the wave offering to God. And so they're doing all these things, and in 23 it says, and Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared. So when you've done the right steps, when you've taken care of sin, when you've done this procedurally, here God shows his glory. And the fire came out from the Lord and consumed the altar, the burnt offering, the fat, and the people saw it, and they shouted and fell on their face. I don't know if that came from heavens down or whether that came from the tabernacle out, but fire came. This was showing that God found it acceptable. This is important for we Christians to find that God finds our sacrifices acceptable, not for righteousness, but the things that we do in honor. But here, this was for righteousness. This was for setting up their nation. And so this was very important for them to do. We see these two guys come back in, Nadab and Abihu. Now, Nadab and Abihu were there. Remember when Moses went up to see God, then he came down with the covenant, and they met with the 70 elders. Well, Nadab and Abihu, sons of Aaron, were there. They're mentioned. But here, they've gone through all of this thing. One thing we forget when we see people introduced, we act like they came out of nowhere. They just appeared out of the trees or something. These guys, like the guys we just met, Bezaleel and Aholibah, that these people were in Egypt. These people went out of Egypt. These people saw the plagues. These people went through the Red Sea. These people were among the murmurers. These people were traveling with God. They saw Moses go up and come down, and they read the covenant and agreed to it. And then Moses went up again. These people, plus those two others, all four of the men mentioned, would have seen the golden calf, would have seen what Moses did, and would have maybe quaked with fear at the fact that God was just going to wipe them all out because of their sin. People don't come from nowhere in the Bible. We have to realize that, even though they're first introduced to us, or they're an important part of a story, they don't come from nowhere. So realize these men should have known. They had all that background. They'd seen all that stuff. They didn't just appear out of a trees and go, "What's going on, guys? What are you doing? Oh, you want me to be a priest? Sure, I'll be a priest." But they go and do strange fire. Now, God doesn't tell us what that is, and it's a good thing. Sometimes the Bible will not tell you what something is, because if they did, we do it. Many of times when they wiped out people like the Amalekites or some of these other ites completely, just like a dish, well, what did they do? Well, they were so bad, he wiped it out and didn't tell us about it. Even mere remnants, mere whispers of what they did became a contagion, became a cancer, became something that became problems among the people of God. I mean, people went from David, worshiping God, the apple of God's eye, that they could have all emulated, to later on, farther down the road, there was King Manasseh, who was a terrible, horrible king, led Israel to do worse than any of the nations around them. So we see that sin is a contagion, that God doesn't tell you what the strange fire is. It's not the fire that he wanted. Either the offering was bad or the methodology was bad. So it isn't just always a heart issue. Usually when I do something procedurally wrong, it's not an error. I'm doing it on purpose. Fire came out from the Lord, devoured them, and they died. Moses talked to Aaron, saying that the Lord says, "I will be sanctified in them that come nigh to me, and before all the people I will be glorified." So God is saying, I will be set apart. You just don't approach me like you want to. This is why Jesus said that he is the way, the truth, and the life. People think that they can approach the Creator God or Jehovah God in any way and create their own religion. Jesus is fine with whatever you do. They're wrong. There's honor, there's respect, and there is procedures. Even though they're not for salvation, there are respect procedures we all have. If I go into another man's house, he might ask me to take off my shoes, leave them by the door. He might not care, but he might care, is there anything on my shoes? Or do I put my feet on his furniture? Or do I use a coaster if we have drinks? Do I go in and raid the refrigerator, or do I ask for permission for things? Where is something at? Do I roam the house freely, or do I ask where, like, the bathroom is or something? There are procedural respects and honors that we do one another. But God is saying it's higher than that. I will be set apart. It's basically saying you will do what I say the way I say it. Sometimes we Christians get very confused about what God has said and why he said it, and we make implications about his character, and we don't know and sometimes don't care, and it's sad. But here, Moses calls two others, Mishael and Elzaphan. These are also of Aaron's kin. Come near with your brethren, and they go and carry the bodies out. And they cover not your head, and don't rend your clothes, lest you die. Don't mourn for these guys. These guys brought this on themselves. So that's just what God is saying here. Don't mourn for these guys. It's an insult to God to mourn for them when they did this for themselves. Lest your brethren, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning that the Lord has kindled. And you don't go out of the door of the tabernacle lest you die. So they had to bring them out and leave them at the door. Someone else would go and pick them up. Do not drink strong wine, nor drink, thou nor thy sons, when you go to the tabernacle of the congregation, lest you die. It'll be a statute forever. There's an implication here that these guys were drunk. Now, it doesn't say that they were, but if you do something and it's very strong and you're very angry about it, and then something happens and you've got this stuff going on, and then you go, don't do this and don't do that. Well, usually that's because that was a causality or a part of the causality. When a child is running through the kitchen and knocks down something and breaks it, you get angry, of course. It's broken. Let's clean it up. Can you be more careful? And then you make a rule, no more running in the kitchen. That's exactly kind of what's happening here. I think that this is tied to that. And you need to make difference between the holy and the unholy, between the clean and the unclean. They obviously, again, by implication, they picked an unholy thing and put it on the altar, or they put an unclean thing. I mean, would that tick off God? From what we know so far about the burnt offerings, the peace offerings, the sin offerings, the trespass offerings, would it tick off God? Would he get very angry if you put an unclean thing or an unholy thing onto the altar? Yes, he would, and he did. And you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken to them. And Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar his sons, take the meat offering that remains of the offerings of the Lord made by fire, and eat it without the altar, for it is holy. You get the idea that this was a meat offering going on that was done improperly, but they still had to finish the procedure. It was still holy, although the procedure was not. It was still holy, not the unclean part or the unholy part. So they had to finish the procedure. So he goes through the rest of chapter 10 talking about doing a wave offering and a heave offering, and you shall eat it with your sons and your daughters. So they finished what was started, it seems, in this story, that these guys were involved with something that had a heave offering, which is, again, more of a peace offering. Maybe they treated a peace offering like the sin offering and did strange fire, because you do the fire, you do it differently. And you get the idea here, since this is a heave offering. And they'd wave it before the Lord, and it shall be thine and thy sons. Moses diligently sought the goat of the sin offering. Behold, it was burnt, and he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, because they hadn't eaten it correctly. But Aaron steps in and says, hey, because of the problem we had here, we couldn't necessarily eat it the way that it was supposed to be done, because of how it was mishandled by the other two boys. We had to be a little more delicate with it this time. And it says Moses kind of heard that, and he was content. He kind of understood that they couldn't just throw the thing away. Even though the procedure had not been done correctly, they couldn't just throw it away. It was still holy. You still had to finish it. You still had to consume it. You still had to finish the procedure to God, even though it was done at the beginning incorrectly. And so they finished the procedure and the worship unto God, and Moses and Aaron understood that. So we're seeing here in these last two chapters important things. First of all, that offerings were made. Offerings needed to be made a certain way, and that there was a problem when you did them wrong. We get the idea that, can we worship our God wrong? I mean, we won't lose our salvation, but are some of the things we're doing in our churches disrespectful to God, dishonorable to Him? We should stop and always keep an eye on how we're doing procedures. Are we being respectful? I think sometimes the modern churches are highly disrespectful, the way you dress, the way they gyrate, sometimes the way they dance, sometimes with the flippant language, sometimes with, we've seen churches with Star Wars clips and Far Side cartoons, and they throw in all kinds of American culture, which doesn't help with biblical understanding. So we need to make sure that we keep the Bible. I'm all for telling jokes, and I'm all for a good story that makes a point, and I'm all for just enjoying our culture. But we also need to show respectful lines for what is the Word of God and what is not. Too bad Abihu and Dad didn't learn that. Thank you.